You refer in your memorandum to the effect that Suez had on Britain's relations with the United States, but Suez also had a huge effect on Britain's standing in the Middle East, which lasted for quite a long time. Were any of your officials, whether stationed in the region or in the Foreign Office, worried that military action to topple Saddam Hussein could have a similar effect on our standing in the Middle East and on Middle Eastern stability to that of Suez?
I never heard it quite put that way, although, I mean, as you know yourself, amongst the Foreign Office staff, most of them have to take a very serious history, a very serious interest in political history, and often are steeped in an understanding of the region they're serving. So there were plenty of discussions that I took part in about British foreign policy in the Middle East since the war. I mean, the problem with Suez, above all, was that we decided to go it alone with France and Israel without involving the United States, and that was absolutely catastrophic, as we know. I mean, you can mark a kind of decline in Britain's standing in the world from that catastrophic and a wholly secret decision, in which, since I'm sure we'll get on to talking about cabinet government, it was kept from the cabinet altogether, apart from a handful of people. So and I've tried to sort of think through why, you know, what was the kind of mindset of people, not just of ministers, but of the kind of zeitgeist around, and I think that was part of it. And of course, we were aware for sure that if we got all this wrong, Britain's standing in the world would be affected, especially in that region. And it was for that reason, above all, as well as the merits of the case, that the Prime Minister and I and everybody else were so concerned to see that alongside any strategy we had on Iraq, there was real progress made on resolving the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians.
To come back to that, but just on the expertise on the Middle East, obviously when Iraq got to the top of the agenda, you must have been pummeling your Middle Eastern experts, your research analysts and so on, the people steeped in the region, as you say, for their assessment as to what the consequences would be in the region and also what might happen inside Iraq after action to topple Saddam Hussein. What sort of advice? Were they worried about this?
Well, we were all worried, if I may say so. The President had publicly and formally surfaced his concerns in the Axis of Evil speech, which I think was the 22nd of January 2001. I happened to be in Washington when he made that speech, as I say, not present. And I was concerned too about the way he had sought to link these three very different problems together. And I'm just saying parenthetically that it, in my view, made the handling of Iran much more difficult, because we were at a point where we were seeking a rapprochement with Khatami, who reached out to us after 9/11, and that undermined the reformists in the Iranian government. But say, as this was put on the agenda, of course there were a lot of discussions, formal and informal, in the Foreign Office with ambassadors about the situation. I mean,
and you had some contrarian views, presumably, in those discussions.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, it's the Foreign Office, and and people have strong opinions. I mean, I may say so. You were one of those, and absolutely right. And I've always worked on the tent principle. I've thought it absolutely essential that people had a different point of view. They should feel completely free.
Powell talked the other day about our failure to anticipate the situation which arose after Saddam was toppled. Now, is it fair to say that we did fail to anticipate it?
What we anticipated were different problems. We first of all thought that there'd be quite a protracted military phase, because there was this absolutely profound belief that Saddam still had chemical and biological weapons which he could deploy, that the Saddam Hussein regime had some kind of consent from the Iraqis. So we anticipated that there'd be quite a long military phase to the campaign, and that the losses might be significant. It was certainly the case that there was anxiety, which indeed I expressed to the Prime Minister from time to time, about what the situation would be and how easy or difficult it would be to manage the situation. And I think that the best way I can summarize this is in some of the papers that I've been reading to refresh my memory. There was a briefing that there would be a relatively short period where we'd be welcomed, and relatively a short period of calm. But the groups who were welcoming us would then say, well, thank you very much, and may we politely show you the door. And I'm happy to talk about what happened in 2003. I actually think that a significant number of the problems that we faced at the end of the, as it turned out, short military phase could have been avoided by better planning and coordination, above all in Washington. We may want to come on to that.
Yeah, we'll certainly want to come back to that later. I think my colleagues do want to discuss that in some detail with you. So if we get to the situation as the Prime Minister was approaching his meeting at Crawford with the President in April of 2002, at that stage, the Cabinet Office OD Secretariat produces an options paper. I think I'm right in saying that it was the only Cabinet Office paper looking at strategic options that was produced throughout this period, unless you can remember another.
Well, I can't remember another,
No.
but I great respect that you have all the papers. I mean,
It's the only one I've seen so
all the
far.
papers.
And that paper looked at essentially two alternatives: toughening containment, maintaining containment, which, as it said, had been a partially successful policy up to then, or alternatively looking at regime change by, they identified three possible routes. So that implies a certain level of debate is going on. And then the Prime Minister also specifically invited you and the Defence Secretary to offer your views, which you both did, before Crawford. Can you tell us to what extent at this stage there was a real debate about different strategic options? Because this is really a critical time before we get set on a particular course. And what advice you were offering the Prime Minister about his options?
Yeah. Yes, there was a debate, and crucial that there should have been a debate. And my mind certainly wasn't made up at this time. I mean, let me be clear about this, that, and this I was clear about, whatever the policy of the United States, which as it happens was for regime change, as a purpose of foreign policy, that was off the agenda so far as the United Kingdom was concerned. I certainly, and always had done, in the abstract and in reality, accepted that you could have a diplomatic strategy for a different purpose, which had to be backed by the threat, or if necessary, the use of force. But a foreign policy objective of regime change, I regarded as improper and also self-evidently unlawful. But leave aside the lawfulness of it, it had no chance of being a runner in the United Kingdom, would not have got my support. And the case, therefore, stood or fell on whether Iraq posed a threat to international peace and security by reasons of its weapons of mass destruction, not on whether it had an extremely unpleasant authoritarian regime that was butchering its own people, because in international law, I'm afraid, that is not a good grounds for intervention by other states.